field trip coordinator and truly excellent photographer. Any of you who have been to our December photo sharing programs have seen her work, and it is truly stunning to see. So I'm really excited to see what she shows us and hear some of her techniques. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Star.
Thank you, Scott. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Star Posada. Again, I am the field trip coordinator for the Paso Audubon, and I do bird photography as a hobby. I am by no means a professional. This is just to help you out if you've been interested in bird photography and don't know where to start. I know it's very intimidating when I started, so I put this together to hopefully help you get in the right direction and not be intimidated. I will be stopping my video so I don't get distracted by looking at myself talking. So let me do that. And then okay, bird photography. So the topics I will be discussing today are the different types of cameras, the different brands that are commonly used, prices, lenses, settings, tips, and last but not least, bird etiquette, which is really important. All these, I got all this information from several websites that compared cameras, lenses, and the prices are all from Amazon. So there are different brands out there: Nikon, Sony, Canon, Pentax, Panasonic, and Fujifilm, with Nikon, Sony, and Canon being the most popular when it comes to wildlife photography. There are three different types of cameras: the bridge cameras, which is a telephoto zoom camera that you don't switch out lenses. The lens is already attached to it. It has a really good zoom ability, and it's basically a point and click camera. Then you have your DSLRs, which is a digital single lens reflex. With those cameras, you do swap out lenses. So if you want a smaller lens or a telephoto lens, you will be having to switch out lenses with DSLRs. And of course, with the mirrorless cameras as well. Mirrorless cameras are basically DSLRs without the internal mirror that reflects light onto the sensor. So they tend to be smaller and lighter. If it doesn't get confusing enough with the different types of cameras and the different brands out there, we also have different types of sensors. And Nikon and Canon like to name their sensors different. So with Nikon, you have a DX and an FX. DX being a smaller sensor, or also known as a crop sensor. FX being a large sensor or full frame, and it's approximately the size of a 35mm film. With Canon, a full frame is called full frame, and a crop sensor is called APS-C. And it's good to note that the Canon crop sensors are a little bit smaller than the Nikon's crop sensors. And then you also have the point and shoot bridge cameras, which have a 1-inch sensor. And you also have the Panasonic Lumix ones, which have a 1/3 sensor. Here's just a picture of the sensor sizes, yellow being the ones that we are going to talk about in the presentation. Okay, so there's different pros and cons to having a crop sensor and a full sensor camera. The pros to the crop sensor ones are that they're cheaper. The lenses and the camera themselves are cheaper because they're smaller and lighter in size. With the crop sensor, you have more of a telephoto ability to it. So basically, a 200mm lens becomes a 300mm lens. The image quality is often better and it offers more sharpness. The cons is that because it is a cropped, it's not good for low light. You have a smaller viewfinder image and a smaller dynamic range. Now, pros and cons to full frame cameras are that they perform well under low light due to the larger pixels. You have better control of the depth of field, and they have a higher dynamic range. The cons then being more expensive and larger and heavier. So the first type of camera are the bridge cameras. The one that most photographers liked was the Nikon Coolpix P1000. According to Amazon, this one's going for about $1,000. This is a great camera for beginners because you don't need to buy different lenses. The lens is attached to it. It can zoom up to 3,000 millimeters. It can shoot JPEG and RAW, and it's super easy to use. It actually isn't as heavy as the other cameras we're about to talk about. The runner-ups were the Canon PowerShoot, the Panasonic, and the Sony. And I put the different prices there so you all can see, budget is a huge thing. Everyone has, $20,000 to invest into this hobby because it is an expensive hobby, as you'll see. With the DSLRs, the Canon EOS 5D Mark IV, which is a frame, and the Nikon D500 FX are both going for the 2,500 level. These were voted the best DSLR cameras for bird photography. Next runner-up was the Nikon D500dx. This is a camera I shoot. This one, it's still pretty expensive, but not as expensive as that 2,500. And then again, you have the other Canon ones that were runner-ups. Again, you can see the price difference between the FX full frames and the DX crop sensors. When it comes to mirrorless, Sony a7 full frame is the best one out there. That one is going for about $1,700. And then you have the Nikon Z50DX, which is a crop sensor, for going for about $1,000. And again, mirrorless cameras tend to be smaller and lighter because they don't have that mirror that reflects the image, the light. So now that we talked about several cameras, now we get into lenses, unless you're going for the point and shoot Coolpix 1000. So for lenses, at least a minimum of a 300 millimeter So lenses can range anywhere between $500 to $3,000. So your typical lower lenses are gonna be lower quality, the glass. You're not gonna get a sharp image out of those. Those usually go between 500 and 1,000. Then your next mid-level lenses go between 1,000 to 3,000. Those have a typical range focal of 150 to 600 millimeters, and they have better autofocus and image stabilization. That is going to be the most common one and affordable one. Then you have the ones that are 3,000 and higher. I call those the Nat Geo lenses. They have the better glass, the better autofocus, the best image stabilizing, but of course they are super expensive. You have two types of lenses. You have a prime lens and a zoom lens. With the prime lens, you have a fixed focal length. Those have a wider aperture, a lower f-stop. Then you have your zoom lenses, which are your 150 to 600 millimeters, and those you can zoom out and in or out, and they have a small aperture. So what is aperture? We will talk about that when we get to the settings. Here are the most common lenses used in bird photography. I do want to stress that Sigma and Tamron, they're universal. You can use those with Canon, Nikon, and Sony cameras, as long as you get the one with the mount for your camera or an adapter if you have a Sony. These are, pretty affordable. They're $1,000, and the range is great, 150 to 600. That's really good. They're about 4 pounds each, and with the only complaint with these is, you lack sharpness at the high magnification. This Sony has a Sony FE 100 to 400, and this one is pretty pricey, 2,500. It weighs less than the Sigma and Tamron. It's more compact, and its distance really good on mirrorless cameras. Canon lenses are more expensive than Nikon lenses, I will say that. Canon lenses are extremely sharp. but they're only for Canon. So you can only use them on Canon bodies. Here you have a telephoto lens and a zoom lens. They're extremely great lenses and super clear. Here are the two best Nikon lenses for bird photography. The Nikkor 200 to 500 is what I shoot with, and it's great for all wildlife, not just birds, but it is 5 pounds. It's super heavy, and this is just 5 pounds with the lens. You still have to factor in how much your camera weighs, which is probably 4 pounds. So if you've ever seen me out there birding or, you know, been on my bird tours, you've seen me with this, and it is huge. It is heavy. You know, you need a good shoulder strap for this one. But it is, in my opinion, the best bird lens out there. The Nikkor 300 is a prime lens, so it's fixed at 300. This one is about $2,000, and it's great because it's only 1.6 pounds. It's great for birds, wildlife, sports. It's got nanocrystal coating, and it's super quiet. Again, do you want that extra zoom with the 200 to 500, or do you want just a fixed focal 300 lens, which is going to get you a clearer picture? So some of the settings, you're going to hear Aperture and F-Stop thrown out if you're new to photography. And this can be really intimidating, but just I'll teach you concepts that hopefully help you out. So aperture is the opening in the lens through which the light passes to enter the camera. The f-stop is focal length. So just remember, the lower the f-stop number, the bigger the aperture. So a f-stop of 1.4 is open, it's large, versus an f-stop of 16 has a small aperture. And I put this nifty scale on there so you can see, you know, the more wider it is, the more light that goes in, the more, you know, smaller the aperture, the less light is going to go in there. So with this one, just keep in mind shallow depth of field versus the depth of field for focus. This other chart shows what I, was talking about. When your f-stop is at 1.4, 2.0, you're going to get a background that's blurred out. That is usually referred to as bokeh, and I'm probably butchering that, but that's how I know it. So a very shallow depth of field will result in a more blurred background, and I'll show you actually what that looks like with a picture of a bird. I like shooting this way, that if I'm only shooting one bird, this is what I like. But just remember that a low f-stop gives you that blur background effect. And this is what I'm talking about. As you can see, the bird is crystal clear, but everything in the background is just blurred. The next thing about settings we're going to talk about is the shutter speed and ISO. So shutter speed is how long an image is exposed to light. The longer the shutter speed, the more blur, and the quicker the shutter speed, you freeze that image in motion. I'll also show you a picture of what that looks like with a quick shutter freeze. ISO brightens or darkens the photo. If you have low ISO, it's darker. If you have a high ISO, it's more light. But the higher ISO, you get more grain or noise in your picture. And that, just keep that in mind. So this is a long exposure shot. This is actually light trails from a semi passing through the road on Hawk Alley. So you can see how it just like captured everything and it blurred the lights. Again, it's used for Milky Way photos because it's open for longer. So anything with astro will have that. But on the other hand, you can do the opposite and freeze in motion with a fast shutter speed, like my red-tailed hawk here. And here's a little diagram to help you with that. So slow shutter speed blurs the motion. A fast shutter speed freezes it. With your aperture, with the wider it is, you get a more shallow depth of field. And with the more narrow it is, you get a greater depth of field. And then your ISO. So if you mess around with your shutter, you're going to have to account for that with your aperture. So keep that in mind when we start talking about shooting modes. Again, the lower ISO, the more darker it is, the higher ISO, the brighter your picture is going to be. I have some pictures to your birds I took. And so at the bottom left, right-hand corner, you can see my settings. So my f-stop is 5.6. That's the lowest that my Nikkor 200 to 500 goes. And so I shot it at 500 millimeters and my ISO is 1000 and my shutter speed was 1 of 5000. And you can see it's frozen in place. Again, my ISO was 1000, same settings here. The faster your shutter, the more you're gonna freeze your bird in place. Same thing here, as you can see the book background here. I had to zoom in and out for this hummingbird because it was super close. But I kept my ISO at 1000. I typically keep it at 1000 and I only mess around with my shutter. And then here, as you can see, it was open for too long and I didn't get the full wings in the picture, although a lot of people love my Angry Bird picture. I do not, because I wanted to freeze the wings and it was open for too long. It wasn't quick, but this is my Angry Bird. And again, with the wings of the ducks, it wasn't fast enough to capture them frozen. So your camera has different shooting modes that can help you, change the shutter speed or the aperture. And you can shoot with any of these. The P on both Canon and Nikon is going to be a programmed auto. So basically, the camera is going to adjust the aperture and shutter speed for you. You can, however, still change things within, there, like the aperture or the shutter speed. This is a great way to start so that you can see what the camera chooses and then start learning from there. Like if your shutter speed is high, what does that look like compared to your aperture and your ISO? If you want to choose the shutter speed and just want the camera to, choose the aperture, then you should shoot S, which is shutter priority on a Nikon. On a Canon, it's TV. If you want to choose the aperture, but you want the camera to just automatically adjust the shutter speed for you, then you shoot aperture priority or AV on a Canon. This one is a little bit more common with what I do in the mornings when the sun is moving quickly. I like to shoot either manual or aperture priority. Manual, you choose both the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. You control everything. You're accommodating for the light, you're accommodating for if it's in a shady area. So with manual, you're choosing all the settings yourself. With shutter priority and aperture, the camera is going to choose either, the aperture or the shutter speed for you. So, a lot of photographers say, if you don't shoot manual, you're not a photographer. Well, shooting birds is hard. And, the sun changes, the different time changes, and birds aren't still all the time. So if you want to shoot shutter to make it easier or aperture, go for it. Okay, so some of the tips I have for everyone is have the right bird photography equipment: lenses, cameras, tripods. Remember, when you pick out a lens, you want minimum of a 300 millimeter focal length. Fast shutter speeds for birds in flight, so you can capture and freeze those wings in your view. Focus on the eye when you're shooting a bird that's still perched. Focus on the eye. Avoid facing the sun directly. You don't want to point your camera up at the sun if you're looking at a bird. You're gonna get a black shot. You're gonna get a horrible picture, and the sun rays will harm your camera. They do sell filters for your lenses, but just keep that in mind. You don't want to face the sun directly. Use a tripod if you're, stationary. If you're walking around, it's harder to walk around with, a 5-pound lens. Be patient. And if you're not sure what lens you want or what camera you want, you can always rent these lenses. They have sites like borrowlenses.com and Rent-A-Lens where you can try them out. This is how I discovered I really like that Nikkor 200 to 500. I wasn't sure if I wanted a Sigma or a Tamron, but I went ahead and rented them, and I just fell in love with the Nikkor. It was clear for me. I liked it better. But had I not, I could have spent all that money on a Sigma and not been happy with it. So you can rent any equipment. And again, practice, practice, practice. So bird photography etiquette. You would think it's common sense, but it's not. I went down to Cave Creek this weekend, and the volunteers were talking about, bad photographers. When I say bad photographers, I mean, it makes every photographer look bad there. They just see a person with camera and assume we're all going to be doing, the same thing that the last person did. Maintain a good distance. Use a telephoto lens. You don't want to spook a bird. You don't want to get close to a bird, not just bird, any wildlife. Respect the habitat. Avoid trampling sensitive vegetation, harming other wildlife near it. And a big no-no is no flash for nocturnal birds, owls, nightjars. This limits their ability to hunt for food. It also, makes them not want to come back to that same spot. This is a big issue down there in Cave Creek. Apparently, a lot of photographers are using flash on these owls. Remove GPS data from images of rare sensitive species like owls. I know Kevin did ask me about, if I do that. After he brought that up, I went into my settings, and yes, I never have GPS data on any of my pictures, but this is a big thing because other, people who potentially want to harm owls can just get the data from the photo you posted and see where you took that picture. Do not use drones for photographs. Do not use drones to photograph or film birds, especially at their nests. And don't bait or lure the birds. Another issue, I guess, that is common is people will buy mice to try and lure hawks or owls and then take the picture. So I know I went through that pretty quick, but if anyone has any questions, please ask. Nobody has any questions?
Star, how did you get to start playing around with like the aperture versus shutter speed versus ISO and all of that? Like, how difficult is that to do? Speaking as someone who puts their camera in auto, and that's as far as I go.
It's hard, but the way I learned is I was shooting programmed auto, and I would look at the photo once I would take in and say, okay, well, that looks good, And so I remembered if my aperture is at this, my shutter was at this, and my ISO was at, this. Then I started trying to do it myself on manual. Again, I missed a lot of good opportunities because, it was be too dark. It wasn't fast enough, but I just played around, and I talked to other photographers out there. Al Wallace, my friend, is great at photography. So he would tell me, hey, you got to raise your ISO, you got to, lower your shutter, raise it. But it was just practice, practice, practice.
Star, this is Scott. I was wondering if you've ever used a teleconverter with your lens.
No, but I've been wanting to. The Nikkor 200 to 500 has been great for me. I feel like it's perfect. but I haven't. I can, I haven't. Do
Um,
you use a tile converter?
No, I've wanted to try one out myself. So I may go the
Okay.
rental route and see how it works.
Yeah, just make sure that the one you get has a mount for your camera, because they will change whether it's a full frame or a crop sensor.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was getting the mindset that I wish I could get it in closer, pull the bird in closer for the shot. And I was thinking bigger lens or something, but I think at some point you have to realize that there's always going to be some shot that's out of your range, no matter what kind of equipment you have. You just do the best with what you've got.
Hmm.
You certainly do that.
I get lucky, Scott. Just kidding. So there's a question in the chat: where can DSLRs get serviced, or recommended videos on doing this at home, and how often should they get serviced? So I get mine serviced once a year. I clean the sensors out because I am out, hiking and all the dust. There's local shops here in town, and I can send you that information if you'd like, or you can send it to, whether it's a Nikon or Canon, they offer that service at a price, of course. I don't recommend doing this at home if you aren't, familiar with it. I don't do it at home. I'd rather just take it down to the shop and have them clean up my sensor. Cameras are expensive, and the last thing I want to do is mess it up.
Question for you. For the I guess for your camera, the one that you actually use, the birds, does that actually have any features to like narrow down a bird, or is this something that you just kind of have to focus manually most of the time?
So focus is, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just kind of curious. I know like some cameras, it'll try to focus for you, but I'm not. I guess I'm wondering what do you do if it doesn't have that feature?
So if it doesn't have autofocus where it's tracking it, you set it on there and it's tracking it for you, then you gotta manually focus. It gets hard when the bird is in flight, because if you do have autofocus, it just follows the bird in flight. But if you don't have that feature, then you have to manually focus. The more expensive lenses and cameras have that option that it autofocuses it for you. So you get what you pay for in a way.
Good.
Any other questions?
So, Star, what have you come across in your photography communities about mirrorless cameras? Like how do they stack up to the DSLRs? Or have you come across much about them? They seem to be the latest and greatest.
They are the latest and greatest, and I know two of our local builders, there's probably more, but I know two of them have let me try their mirrorless cameras, and I'm jealous because they're so much lighter than my DSLR, and their pictures are great. They're quicker, they're quieter. It's just at this point, am I willing to, convert? Because now I'll have to get converters for the lenses I already have for my DSLR. So when I said this hobby is expensive, it's expensive. It's not cheap. But those that do have mirrorless cameras do love them, and I'm pretty jealous about them. Kevin, I know you shoot the Nikon Coolpix 1000 and you enjoy that, and I think I'm jealous that you don't have to switch out lenses either.
Yeah, I have the 900. I think
Oh, the 900.
Liz, who's on the call, has the 1000, and I think she had a 900 initially. But yeah, I'm looking at upgrading to either a DSLR or a mirrorless, because it's nice, it's light, it's easy, you don't have to change things out, but you also miss a lot more photos than I think you would otherwise. Like you said, you get what you pay for. It's a good camera, it's a bridge camera. If the bird is close and still, you get great pictures. If it's moving at all, it's really tough. With most of the bridge cameras, it's really tough. But it's also a lot cheaper. So if you are interested in trying to get some good photography, I think the 900, because it's the older model, is probably under $500 now. So still fun.
Yes, if budget is, the most important thing, definitely I would definitely go for that P1000 or the 900s, just because you don't have to deal with the different lenses, the telephoto lenses, which do become expensive.
Star, how do you carry the camera? Do you just have the neck strap, or do you have a shoulder strap?
No, I have a shoulder strap because again, just the lens is 5 pounds, and then my camera is about 4 pounds. So I have a shoulder strap. That's one thing you do have to invest in when you start having all this weight, is you don't want your camera to fall and break. So a good shoulder strap or a harness to carry your stuff.
Yeah, I've noticed myself, I've just got a neck strap, and after a long day out walking around with it, you feel it a lot more than I think you would with a shoulder strap. And then also those chest mounted ones, it's like a vest that you put on that has a little mount that you can strap your camera onto, has a little attachment that allows you to hold it there, and then that just puts all the weight on your shoulders rather than on your neck. And I've seen a lot of people that use those, and they seem real happy with them, especially when they've got the bigger lenses.
Yes, Julio, a bird photographer, I don't know if you all have seen him out at our board tours. He has one of those and loves it. So that's another option. I do like the shoulder strap myself.
And that works well. You can, what do you just swing the camera up
Yes.
as you're ready to get to the shot?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And if you ever see me out there on a bird tour, if you want to try out the camera, by all means. If you want to carry it and see how heavy it is, I'm more than welcome to show you. So.
You're looking for little packers there to help.
Help me pack my camera and my gear. Yeah. I also carry the binoculars on my other shoulder, so.
I guess I got another question. I guess how often is it a hit or miss? Like, how do you gauge taking pictures of birds, considering that they're fast or quick? Is it a success rate you work with, or that you know of, or what do you recommend for, like, I guess someone who's still very, very new to it, I guess?
When they're in flight?
I guess not in flight, but like like, how often do your pictures come out good? Like, how do you know, like, I guess I'm going to be out there, and if I keep messing up, then is that common, or what do you expect to see normally?
Yes, so your camera also has different settings, like continuous picture taking or just one. Remember, like bursts, they're called. My camera has where you can take 5 bursts, so like snap it and it takes 5, but that's gonna eat up your memory card. That's how I did start off, and maybe 1 out of 20 pictures I took was good, but it's super common that you're never gonna get a good shot the first time you take a picture. I sometimes take 15 pictures of the same bird and none of them came out fine. Again, I'm messing with my ISO, I'm messing with my shutter, well, if the bird is perched, I have to do that. But yeah, it's super common that if you do get the perfect shot the first time, more power to you. Come out birding with us. But yeah. And Angel, what do you shoot with?
I have a Sony mirrorless, an Alpha 7.
See, mirrorless.
Yeah.
Nice. And do you like it?
I love it. I love it. But yeah, it is super expensive, and I bought myself a full frame thinking this is what I really needed, and it's expensive to buy a lens after a lens. So I'm kind of regretting it. I should have got myself a crop sensor. So, but I love the camera though. The camera itself is amazing. The features on it are ridiculously cool. So
There you go.
I don't have a nice fancy lens though. That's my next thing, is to get myself one of that goes pretty far, like the ones that you described earlier. So I think the longest one I have is an 85 millimeter.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you need definitely at least a 300 millimeter focal length.
I'll work on that. Thanks, sir.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, Star. This is Tom
Yes.
Johnson. Hi.
Hi.
Do you have any kind of tips or secrets you use for hummingbirds? Or do you use flashes, do anything fancy, or just go out and photograph them?
Just go out and photograph them. I would say with hummingbirds, you can set your camera to aperture so it chooses the shutter for you. So, it freezes the wings in place. But hummingbirds are tough because they're tiny and they fly super fast. Again, use the natural light sunlight to have the colors pop out. Black chin hummingbirds, Lucifer hummingbirds, just wait for it to turn the right angle for their color to show, and then just snap your 10,000 pictures, and hopefully you get a pretty good one. But yeah, Tom, it's just, I would shoot Aperture Priority for hummingbirds.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions?
Star, have you ever thought of doing a field trip just to have people take pictures, like go someplace where birds are plentiful in one spot and people can try different methods, like aperture priority or shutter priority, and be able to, have some advice while they're there about things that they might change in their settings to improve their shots.
No, but that's a good idea. I definitely will consider that. And yes, Escarate and Keystone would be the perfect spots for those. But yeah, that's something I'll open up, and we'll do a bird photography tour. Hope to see you there, Scott.
Oh yeah, I'll be there.
And so someone said that many bird photographers have given up bringing their binoculars with them to reduce the weight. Have you thought about that? Yes, but every time I don't have my binoculars, I regret it. I like looking at the bird via my binoculars, knowing where it's at, and then taking the picture. I'm still pretty old school. I was carrying my field guide at the beginning, and it was a lot of weight until Kevin and Vicky, showed me the ropes with the Audubon app and the Merlin app instead of having my, guidebook. Now when I'm on tours, I hand my bird guide out to someone who doesn't have an app or a guide, but I do use my apps now for IDing birds. Apps for photo storage. Any recommendations? I'm a Google kind of girl, so I love Google Photos. It's no longer free. Now you got to pay for more storage. But I only use Google Photos for my storage. I know iPhones have iCloud. That's another option. When it comes to editing your photos, right? You took all these awesome photos. Now you have to start editing your photos, and that's a whole nother topic. There's Photoshop, there's Lightroom. So that's also something you're going to have to consider, is when you take your photos, you will have to download them if you need to edit them. If you need to convert it from a RAW to a JPEG file, you are going to need a program that does that. So I do recommend, Lightroom or Photoshop for that.
That's right. Sorry, your next presentation is going to be on how to use Lightroom, right?
Yes, that will be my next my next presentation. So I don't know what most of you bird photographers, use here, but Lightroom was the one that was recommended when I started. And I guess I've invested so much time in learning Lightroom that I'm gonna stick to Lightroom. I've tried Photoshop. It's just, I don't think it's as easy as Lightroom. But with Lightroom, you can do a whole lot. And that can be another meeting where I, download a photo and we go through all the steps on what you can do with Lightroom. But again, it starts getting complicated. But if you're shooting raw, that's something you need to consider, is how you're going to download your photo and turn it into a JPEG so you can share it.
I was just going to add that shooting in RAW is really what I've heard is best, because you have more pixels in there, so you can enlarge it more, but it does
Yes.
take up a lot of storage space. So no matter where you store it, if it's in a RAW form, then it's going to occupy a lot more space. But if you're going to be making any prints of things, then the RAW format gives you more ability to enlarge than you would with a JPEG, which will have fewer pixels and won't enlarge as well.
Correct. I personally recommend everyone, if you have the ability and capability, to shoot in RAW and then, edit that and then save it as a JPEG, because you do get to do more with your file versus it being JPEG. It's already compressed. If you are going to print your photos on canvas, it's best to do RAW. And so people always say, how do you back up your photos, right? So I have external hard drives, but something I do, and maybe I don't recommend people to do this, or maybe they do, I keep every single SD card. I never erase them from my camera. So I have a collection of SD cards, and they're expensive, but at least I know that, all the photos I take are still on my SD card. If my computer were to crash, if something were to happen to my external hard drive, I never erase it. And so I just keep buying these, but it does get expensive. So I don't know, how everyone else backs up their photos, but I had a bad experience with my computer crash and I lost everything. So now I just keep all my photos. I just keep buying SD cards. Scott, how do you back up your photos?
I put mine on an external hard drive, and then I have a second one that I back that up with. So I've essentially got two of them, but I'm not as regular with the backing up as I should be. So, but I do have it off the computer.
Okay.
I don't even keep them on my computer. They're all off computer in there. So.
And then I back them up to Google Photos as well. Once I convert it to a JPEG.
Somebody uses the cloud, then I guess that's a good backup as well. I've never done that, but that should be another layer of backup. So, good. Well, any other questions? Any observations? I don't know if people are getting out looking at stuff, want to share some things they've seen. Okay,
Scott?
good. Yes.
Eddie True told me about the Loon with the hook in its feet. Is there any news about that? I didn't know about it.
It's still, as far as I know, it's still there at the lake. I think people are trying to figure out a way to help it out. to maybe capture it and then
Hey, Scott.
move. Yes, Vicky.
Yeah, Lois Balin was able to coordinate with Texas Parks, with the Texas Parks and Wildlife game warden who has a boat. And
Oh,
there's actually a rescue mission tonight. So we'll see if they're able to, so to capture loons, generally you do it at night because you can spotlight them. If this guy is not so tangled that he can still swim, he can swim from one side of Escarte to the other in like one breath. So we would never catch him. So we have to, they're gonna try to spotlight him tonight and see if they can capture him. And then we'll try to fix up that, see how bad the damage is from the hook and where it is. That, you know, that can be really devastating for birds, because if it's far enough down, if he swallowed it and it's far enough down into his stomach, it's a real surgical problem. You can't just snip it out. So we will see. Hopefully it's just wrapped around something, or actually if it's just hooked on his beak, then that's easy to fix.
okay.
But wish them luck tonight, Texas Parks and Wildlife and Lois, and I think John Casita are going to be out there trying to get him.
Great, great. Okay, well,
Vicky, I have another question. Vicky, what do you mean by spotlighting it? Does that blind the bird so it won't move away? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, basically shine, you know, just like spotlighting any wildlife, which we think of as a bad thing. But for the benefit of the bird tonight, we need it to not see them coming. So yeah, they'll use a bright light so that it doesn't realize how close they are. And then hopefully
And then
they
dive.
and yeah, exactly. And then they can net it.
Yeah. Okay, great. I do wish them success.
Yeah.
well, okay, I'm losing my connection, I think. Can people still hear me?
Yes.
For
Okay.
now, yeah.
If you want to continue on, go ahead. I've kind of lost everything here, so I'll let Kevin, if you want to go ahead and
Sure.
wrap things up.
Sure. Well, yeah, if there's no other questions or comments, thanks, Star, for the presentation, and thanks for everyone for attending. This is actually our last meeting of for some reason we're on the academic calendar. And so we're taking our summer hiatus, and then our next general meeting will be August or September, I think September, but keep alert for that and keep your eyes out for field trips and all that good stuff. And thanks for coming.